Let's now focus on education a bit more based on what West Pokot County is doing. One more time, Ken Okoth, MP Kibra, and Dr. Sarah Ruto, chairperson of the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. I want to start with Ken Okoth. It's great that you're here because you've done a lot of work in education in Kibra. You're a two-term MP now, and just this past Thursday you launched Mbagathi Girls High School. I want to show some video right now of this launch, and it's such an important development for Kibra. Why?
I think for me, when I think about education, we must make sure that our education system is accessible. We must make sure that what is being taught there is relevant and it is being taught in a way that is of high quality. So those three things are important for me. In Kibra, access was a huge issue. Making sure that the transition rate, you know, you talked about West Pokot and transition issues. We have marginalization even in places like Kibra and Mathare and other urban settlements where transition rates are equally just as bad because of poverty, because of other issues of overcrowding the primary schools, or school fees issues when it comes to secondary school. So many people cannot even make it to Form 1. But I believe any child who finishes Class 8 has a right to go to Form 1 and finish Form 4. And so that is what we've made it as a priority in Kibra, to make sure no one is left behind. And those who might be left behind, that are the farthest behind, we try to invest and reach them fast to catch them up with everybody. So we are building secondary schools in Kibra that are accessible. And Mbagathi High School for girls is special because we also want to have secondary schools of where parents have a choice. And we will build a boys' high school, but we decided to build a girls' high school this year. And we have built mixed schools before. So it's a question of access and then relevance of the curriculum and the activities in that school, and affordability and the quality to make sure children live there empowered. Regardless of how poor their parents are or how they performed in Class 8, every child has a right to go to secondary school and finish up to Form 4.
When we think of marginalized communities, we think of maybe West Pokot or Turkana or somewhere in the northeastern. But there's also in the low-income communities right here in the cities, in Nairobi and Mombasa, the need is just as strong.
It is absolutely strong. I mean, 60% of the children in urban areas are going to low-cost private schools. They are not in public schools. Yet free primary education was launched in 2002, 16 years ago. It was supposed to be groundbreaking and transformative, and a lot of positive things have been achieved. But it's time to review and ask ourselves honestly, why is it that in places like Kibra, still a lot of children can't get quality education? I went to Olympic Primary School when it was a top school in the nation for 10 years in a row in KCP. But after free primary education, the teachers there are struggling to maintain the quality. It's now the largest school in the country, 4,300 children. And it's just overwhelming, it's overcrowded. So standards fall down, capacity to help all the children to do well is harder. And some parents don't even have a chance to get children to such a school. So they're paying out of pocket, yet they've already paid taxes for public education. So I think, you know, let's do more. And marginalization is just not in West Pokot. It's even here, right underneath our noses in the urban areas.
And in situations like those, Dr. Ruto, it is very difficult to get pupils out of that system who are competent enough because they didn't have enough books, they didn't have classrooms, they didn't have desks. So they can't compete with some of the private schools or some of the better funded public schools.
Yes. While we are striving for equality, of course it is necessary that we also be equitable in what we are doing, which means that for those areas that we have identified, I think it is important to start thinking differently in terms of how do you ensure that the cake is availed to all, irrespective of the circumstances they come from. Because inequalities come because of region, as has been stated, those in the northern Kenya, arid areas, because of socioeconomic backgrounds, sometimes because of language, sometimes because of gender. So I think we are getting good at looking at being aware that equity issues are problematic, but we need to improve. So with for example, a ministry coming back looking at ASAL, I think that's a good thing because it was there before and it made a lot of stride. The same thing is needed also from urban areas and looking not just at urban places but actually households, because there are many places and not just the big urban areas where people are suffering. So it is important to also go deeper into households. So yes, inequality, I think, is a big issue that we need to be addressing in this country.
In the midst of that, you're pushing through this new curriculum, which so far is getting quite negative reviews based on the news reports. I'm looking at some of them right now. KICD denies claim of rushed rollout of curriculum. I'm looking at some of those news stories. You can bring this up, Mike. Curriculum delays put teachers in tight spot. KICD launches investigations into reports of substandard quality. New learning system in disarray, lack of training material cited. New curriculum doomed as teachers confused. So not a good start.
Let me say this about the new curriculum, that first of all, it was due. According to Curriculum Matters, we are supposed to review the curriculum every 5 years. Reforms can come, you know, for a longer period. The last time we reformed the curriculum was 844, several decades ago. Why do we need to review it? Because society changes. If you look at when 844 came and the last review we did, we were even talking about diskettes and, you know, things that were at that time. But life moves, stuff changes, and you must change. Otherwise, the school becomes an isolated thing that is completely not relevant to what is happening outside. So the review had to start, and this review began in 2014. We have had 4 years of planning. I think there are some old mistakes we have avoided. And one of the old mistakes was that when you look at 844, it was put as a block for reform. And this time we are being incremental. 844 teachers were not even inducted. At least this time we have inducted those classes, grades 1 and 2, and preschool that the county governments have been doing in terms of the new curriculum. And I attended them. Is it enough? Certainly not. It can improve, and TSC is planning on how it can ensure that teachers continue to be inducted into and trained in the new curriculum as a continuous process. Learning materials, if you look at 844, there was nothing at all. This time round, as we speak, at least the designs, for those of you who do not know, today we decided in the new curriculum to have designs and not the syllabus, because the syllabus sort of minimized the whole arrangement of learning.
Okay.
And these designs are in all the schools as we are speaking. So can it be improved? Yes, it can, but at least there have been some strides. And I think we'd like to welcome people to support rather than just critique. Otherwise, it will not work out.
Is that your experience with the new curriculum and its implementation?
First of all, I would say there's a difference between an education system and a curriculum. 844 as the education system and the curriculum that was being used, I went through it. And for me, I think we really have to ask ourselves, the key question is, what is it that we were not getting from 844, and could we improve in it? And to be practical, look at the challenges from West Pokot and now. I think for Kenya right now is not to try to go to this whole new education system. We're talking about curriculum reform. Really what I see being implemented or attempting to implement is a whole new educational system, which is going to require a lot of new staff. It's going to require a lot of training. It's going to require a lot of resources which just don't exist. I think within the 844 system we could introduce elements of what they're talking about in terms of curriculum reform within the 844 structure, right? So let's say, how do you create more space for the arts, creative expression? How do you create more paths for young people to go towards careers and trades earlier on if they choose to, so that by the time you finish grade 12 years of primary education and secondary education, you can choose a career path without everybody thinking, I must go to university. So there's different things to think about there, and I think based on the reality of the resources Kenya has, we're biting off too much attention. That would be my first thing. Then the second critique.
So you don't believe that it was necessary to phase out 844 completely? I
think we can stick with 844 and accomplish everything, every ambition that KICD has had with this curriculum reform within the 844 system, and capacity build and use the facilities that exist. Because right now, if you tell me a school like Olympic Primary School is already crammed, 4,300 children, 80 children in a classroom, and then you say we're going to introduce a new stadium of lower primary school, middle school, upper primary, who's going to be their principal, where are the classes going to be, it's just too much to do. Let's stick with what we have and then say, in the materials that are being used and the methods of teaching and the processes of evaluating student success and student learning within that system, what can we change?
Okay.
So we can change that within the existing system and still get the same outcome. So that would be, for me, something more affordable for Kenya, realistic, and has a greater chance of success than all the challenges we're seeing right now.
Great. Dr. Ruto, this is Mbenia Omware says the so-called new curriculum is messed up almost 2 months since schools opened and nothing is happening to class 1 and 2. No learning materials, no books. Kids just go to school basically to play the whole day.
First of all, play is not bad. When you look at grades 1 and 2, I think one of the things that had happened was diminishing that a lot. Secondly, I know categorically, because we've been doing some monitoring, that the designs, and I stated the designs are in public schools. The books, I think, is probably what was being addressed there, is that the whole of last year we went through the process of engagement with publishers to the extent that we now have learning materials, that is books, by the various publishing houses. And these can be bought, and I think many of the private schools are buying them. But some, the public schools have not gotten them because some guidance needs to be given by the Ministry of Education with regards to whether they are buying the books or it's going to be in the new policy where the government purchases a book per student, as has been done for grades 8 and Form 1s to Form 4.
So in view of that, was the rollout of this new curriculum rushed?
It could have been improved. But my own view is that there comes a time when you have to stop planning and plunge into doing. And this is still a pilot. It is still a pilot where we went to full census because we wanted that by the time it is officially launched next year, at least we will have ironed out many of the things that are going on. A number of the areas in the designs, the learning areas, still need to be changed. And maybe I can use this opportunity to say why the difference between the old and the new is for example, we are not talking about different content, but there is a little bit less of what could be done and a little bit more of what could be done. And it cannot be done in the same clothing. You needed a rethinking of the new curriculum. So like when you look at the early years, for example, the way we taught in the previous system was that when a child goes to pre-primary 1 and 2, then it's almost a stop and then grades 1 and 2. But in the early years, our own conceptualization is that learning is not very different. Think of it as a whole block rather than, you know, kindergarten differently and grades 1 to 3 differently. And if you look at what we are teaching in the early years, both in kindergarten and grades 1, 2, and 3, there's continuous, it's 5 learning areas. And then thereafter, once a child has gotten the basics, you then move on. Could it be to have been done in the old clothing? Perhaps. But when we sat and looked at it, we felt that there's very key fundamental things that needed to be changed. And first of all is the whole posture of teaching. Okay. How do you get a new facilitator, a new teacher with the old curriculum? You have to rethink it and change.
Can I say something on that?
Real quick, sir.
I think it's really dangerous, if not even criminal and immoral, that we're still piloting. You want to plunge in and experiment, but you've given the teachers only lesson plans without materials. We're already in February. Who are the children in this country who are suffering from lack of textbooks? That there's a whole ministry that we give, the Ministry of Education, as much money as we give to healthcare and foreign defense, all this money, and they cannot deliver books to schools. So here, the children of the rich, it's an issue of equity and moral. Where do we stand about the rights of children in this country? And the parents of the rich can buy the books and have them. That means the parents of the poor, their children are already being left out. And while you think it's a pilot for 1 year, that 1 year of our children being behind without the resources, there is no way, to be fair to you, at my school, like Olympic Primary School, a teacher with a lesson plan and 90 children in class 1 can teach without textbooks. So I think the ministry, somebody has to be held accountable and wake up. I'm glad we have a new minister who has shown herself competent in another ministry, and I hope that Ambassador Amina Mohammed in the education ministry will take this as a priority and make sure that none of our children are being left behind in a way that is just unacceptable.
Great. Karani says, when I think of the infrastructure in our schools, it is a miracle that our children perform well. He says, we work with a school in Kibra, REC, where pupils are sitting on the ground while they learn. It is a sad situation at this day and age. So, and I guess this is replicated in many other parts of the country.
Yeah, we've got challenges. We've got to add them desks. We've got to build them better classrooms, and we're making progress step by step. And I think for me, our children deserve the best learning environment because education is an equalizer.
Let's leave it here. When will the learning materials get to the schools?
The learning materials are ready. And I think it would be good to, it is only half cup full. They are ready. The next thing is getting them to the schools.
Can you give us timelines?
That is something for the Ministry of Education. I am the chairperson of KICD, where we prepare the learning materials. They are ready, and it's a matter of.
So, from a KICD perspective, you are all set to go. The gap here is with the Ministry of Education.
KICD is part of the Ministry of Education. So, if there is a failure, it is a failure of the Ministry of Education as a whole. But what I'm stating is that the learning materials are available, and secondly. When we talk about the changes, it doesn't mean that everything that was there cannot be used. We have learning materials that we had a huge nationwide reforms where we were focusing more on children learning better to read and do arithmetic, and those books are in schools. In fact, even the learning materials for grade 3 are actually even in public schools. Yes, Honorable Okoth, they are in public schools for grade 3 because they were distributed. So there is a gap.
I think you're comfortable with the fact that children in class 1 and class 2 in government public schools don't have materials, and whoever in the ministry that's supposed to deliver the materials is failing in their job. I'll give you this geographically and very graphically in Nairobi. On one side of Ngong Road, Kilimani, you've got Riara, Makini School, they're private schools, they can buy those materials, they have them. And that our government, our ministry, our KICD, that we pay for with our taxes, people well paid sitting in offices with air conditioning, are comfortable telling us they don't know when they will deliver the materials you've told us are available to the children on the other side of Ngong Road, on the wrong side of Ngong Road. So children in Toi Primary School, Kibra Primary School, Olympic, Mbagathi, don't have the materials. How hard is it to move materials from Jogo House to Kibra? I'll pay for the transport. Give me my books for Kibra. Why aren't you giving me those books?
So the question here is, who is failing the children of Kenya?
A very good question. The mandate of delivering education naturally starts with the Ministry of Education.
All right.
So the Ministry of Education has to take responsibility over there.
Dr. Sarah Ruto Ken Okoth, thank you so much for coming in tonight. We appreciate your insights. And let me read just 2 comments from people who are watching this and reacting in real time. Tonika Vinguha says, Dr. Sarah Ruto says it is okay for grade 1 and 2 to be playing in school 2 months, yet we have paid fees through the nose. I think learning in public schools is free, so in all fairness.
There is some fair, it's just fees still being charged.
Okay.
Yeah.
Matera says the new curriculum is a great idea in the long run. Having gone through the 844 system, I feel I've wasted a lot of time studying. Almost 90% of things I'll never use in life. You and me both. You and me both. I'm sure a lot of us went through 844.
Can I speak to that? I think this is the point of relevance and adaptation. So I think there's time for reform and improvements. For instance, for myself, I was academically oriented. I loved 844 system. It doesn't work for everyone. The shirt I'm wearing now, this nice jacket, it works for somebody else, a young man in Kibra, a fashion designer called Avido. He's creative, but you find that's not in the system anymore. You know, very few schools are offering home economics, only in high school, in primary school, no one's learning how to stitch. You know, by the time you start, it's afterwards.
That is why we need the reform.
And we need the books in the school.
Yes, and we need the reform as well.
Yeah, don't leave our children behind. This is made by a talented young person in Kibra. His talent and relevance and contribution, he had to do it beyond school after. Okay. So let's figure this out and do it right for all our children.
That I agree, for all our children. That is important.
Okay, great.